Welcome, old chum online. Hope you're ready for a little field trip today. This building behind me is the Eldorado Cabaret. Well, actually it's an organic supermarket under renovations because I did take 8 months to finalize the script, but 100 years ago, this was the Eldorado Cabaret. Hier ist richtig. Oder hier war es richtig? Out of the 170 queer bars in 1920s Berlin, the Eldorado was the most spectacular and also the wokest. These corridors and halls were parading into endless nights with ragtime jazz, laughter, joy, misfits from all over the world, people with pronouns who would be obsessed with Liza Minelli had they had the opportunity, lesbians, the gays, trans people who made the Eldorado into safe haven for identity, community, and queer joy. 100 years ago, this place was home to people like me, but today, it's just an organic supermarket, filled to the brim with construction dust, organic pears, kombuchas, and ghosts. This is a video about ghosts, about Weimar Berlin, about the unsettling rise of fascism, and about queer lives in the 1920s and in the 2020s. But maybe as important as all of that, this is a review of 1972's queer classic musical, Cabaret. I love Berlin. It's gloomy, it's cold, it's scary, my friends are all sick of it, but I love Berlin. I had been here half a dozen times before I decided to move in 2024. Yes, of course I did, I'm such a walking stereotype. I'm from Brazil, but I have been living in Europe for almost 7 years now, and other European cities are fine and all, and pretty and super safe, and the trains are punctual, but I don't know, I'm from Latin America, my soul needed a bit of chaos. To throw myself into creative spaces, lose myself inside a melting pot. Divine decadence. Since I was 15, growing up in a very small town, I always craved to be where things were happening. And here I was in my mid-20s, working in tech with a safe-ish career in a bucolic 15-minute city, and I was really bored. I needed people, I needed community, I needed creation, but more than anything, I needed to be challenged. And Berlin was there. Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. Moving to Berlin is a very interesting experience because it's a really unique city, a cultural behemoth, and you can easily lose yourself in it. People do. It's a pulsing contradiction, a city that was shaped by what was erased from it. It's a European cultural icon and at the same time, the least German city in all of Germany. The beer is kind of meh, and the only outfit you would ever be judged for wearing is a Bavarian Tracht. At the same time, you meet the most incredible people with the most incredible stories. Failed musicians, Zoomer supermodels, gay ballerinas, lesbian poets, and Palestinian anarchists. Nobody speaks any German other than, obviously, Ich schreibe aus der Biclea, es kupet madre monstea. Everybody's a little bit bi, and everybody's in a poly relationship. Everybody's broke, of course, but who isn't these days? In the ridiculous Berlin housing crisis, everybody's sharing a flat with 3 or 4 other rising stars. All your friends are 20 or 45, fresh out of college, or have been through 2 divorces. Everybody's dreaming of becoming, dreaming of creating, and some of them do. I quickly made dozens of queer friends, which, regardless of what haters of this channel might try to imply, I had dozens of queer friends.
Dozens of queer
Dozens,
friends?
really?
That's a little bit statistically anomalous, but whatever. I don't even know a dozen people.
Isn't that hard to do if you're a nice person and immerse yourself in creative spaces, which I certainly did. And it gets easier to meet like-minded people when you float through spaces that are designed for people like you. In my case, Flinta spaces. Flinta here meaning somewhere dedicated to women, lesbian, inter, NB, trans, and agender people. Love it or hate it, that's an acronym that you will see everywhere if you're navigating through queer Berlin, as opposed to more traditional LGBT spaces that very frequently just get overtaken by cis gay men. Berlin's queer community builds spaces that try to be safe and inclusive, trying their best to do their own take on intersectionality. And that might not be the first thing you think about when you think Berlin. You might think, well, kombuchas and ghosts, and I swear I will get there, but you might also think techno. Yes, exclusive, underground, apotheotic techno parties that we are not cool enough to be allowed inside, that have bounced Vivian's Lame Dead in the past, where base pilgrims from all over the world come to have a religious experience with the fanciest sound system you've ever seen. But something they don't say that often, and probably the reason why you didn't get into Berghain, These are queer clubs. And as the legendary homopunk Bleach puts it, the reason tourists come to Berlin in the first place is because of the scene queer people have created. But these are not just queer clubs as in made for fruity people, but also queer as in fundamentally countercultural institutions. And well, it's dying. Clubs are going bankrupt, gentrification and rising prices are kicking counterculture out to make way for the ugliest Jeff Bezos buildings ever. This neighborhood used to be home to punks and anarchists and now looks like downtown Toronto or something generic like that. One of the legendary clubs that announced it was closing its doors last year due to the arch nemesis of this little channel, landlords, was the Renate, which I can only describe as a maze in an alternate dimension that feels like what life should always feel like. The Renate was a 5-floor old house and outbow that served as a brothel in the early 20th century. The 5 floors open themselves to you as the night goes on, with different dance floors and hidden rooms, each with radically different and increasingly psychedelic surprises. From out-of-tune CRT TVs to art installations to, well, some blasphemies I'm not sure YouTube allows me to talk about. The stories of love and life that happened between those walls in the last 100 years, closing down in the name of rental agreements and investment funds, soon to become ghosts. The Renate team wrote that the loss of these spaces is not just a blow for club culture, but for the entire city as a whole and its cultural diversity. Clubs like Renate are important places of encounter, exchange, and creative development that characterize Berlin internationally. So last year, they decided to go off with a bang and had a stellar lineup of parties every week. And on a random Thursday, I found myself inside the Ville de Renate in a party called Weimar. And without me going to that party, this video wouldn't exist, because that's the precise moment my 1920s Hyperfocus began. Let me paint you the picture. In Berlin, dress codes are serious. That's the #1 reason why you wouldn't be allowed inside a club. They also always put like stickers in all of your phone cameras to guarantee everyone's privacy and ensure you are enjoying the place you're at. And this party, Weimar, was all about celebrating the, well, Weimar Republic era of Berlin, with roaring, sparkling dresses and feather hairbands and gloves up to the elbows. I basically stepped out of my house into the Berliner night air as if I was going to the cabaret, sitting down in the train as if it were 1920. Next to me in line at the Renate, a tourist who argued he had just arrived from the airport in a polo shirt was denied entry, and the bouncer told him to go put on some makeup, change his clothes, and try again. Because of this bouncer's harsh door policy, when I stepped into the Renate, it was as if I stepped into a time machine. I'm not that huge into techno, but I mean, it was the Renate. There were 3 dance floors dedicated only to techno. But behind a small door close to the bar, another room would open up, and the fever inside would welcome you with the dirtiest, swingiest, sweatiest ragtime jazz you have ever heard. A live acoustic band with horns and a huge double bass in the middle of this techno club turned cabaret. Drag kings reading tarot, magicians performing tricks between drinks, hundreds of queer people flirting, dancing, embodying divine decadence. They were not just dressed up in a Weimar Berlin costume. This was Berlin, remembering who it was once upon a time. And that's when I saw the ghosts for the first time. And again, this was a Thursday, because Berlin is annoying like that. Why are you doing a cool party on a Thursday? I work tomorrow. So I swear, I had like 1 gin tonic tops, and not a phone to be seen anywhere. It was the closest to Weimar it was going to get. I was looking at these queer people today, and I was seeing queer people back then. Seeing them embodying a forgotten Berlin, I started to think of how little things have changed. In the 1920s and the 2020s, Berlin is a safe haven for identity, expression, and queer joy, for people who wouldn't have found this kind of acceptance anywhere else. Looking for a place to find community, to be themselves, to find themselves, and to have the chance to dream just like Sally Bowes. In the Renate, queer people of today were embodying and paying homage to the queer people of back then, and dressing as them and living as them and still listening to their songs after everything that happened, after everything that was lost. Hyperfocus, yes. After that night, I got completely obsessed with how similar 1920s Berlin was to 2020s Berlin. As a party capital, sure, but mainly as a safe space for trans people, writers, musicians, broke artists who share an apartment with 5 roommates to afford rent. Back in the Weimar era, Berlin was home to 170 queer bars and was the refuge for LGBT people from all over the world who wanted to escape into somewhere they were welcomed. Decades before hormonal treatments were even a thing, in Berlin, you could apply to a, swear to God, Transvestitenschein, or a transvestite license. This permit allowed people to wear clothing not associated with their assigned gender without risking arrest under public law orders. It's insanely fascinating. Publications like Die Freundin started to pop up around the city, the world's absolutely first lesbian magazine, published from 1924 to 1933. They publish short stories and novellas because if there's something lesbians have always been obsessed with are fanfics, but also advertisements of lesbian night spots, and an analog printed version of Lesbian Grindr, where girls could place their personal ads and meet other girls. In art, we can still breathe a little bit of that atmosphere through Jeanne Memmen's Transvestite Bar and the Blaue Heiter's painting of Alexander Sakharov, a wildly famous Russian dancer who was well known for androgynous, gender-fluid performances. But still, I felt like I was only scratching the tip of the iceberg and I wanted to learn more. So I started to dig into museums and talk to people who have lived in the neighborhood for a little bit longer, and that's how I learned about the Eldorado. Today, an organic supermarket, but still in a very gay street with a lot of gay flags and cafes and specialty stores. But in 2023, the Big Red released a documentary about the Eldorado called Eldorado, Everything the Nazis Hate. The Eldorado was a safe haven for people who were at the margins, havens for identity, expression, and joy. The documentary follows the lives of a few people who frequented the Eldorado and how their lives changed with the rise of fascism. A transbian couple, a gay Jewish tennis star, your usual sort of Berliners, so hauntingly similar to the people living here today. But Weimar collapses, and we see how the same streets that offered radical liberation suddenly became sites of surveillance, fear, and fascism. One story that stood out to me was of one Charlotte Charlock, a Jewish doll who was an actress, translator, teacher, singer, dancer, and violinist. In the Eldorado, she met many transgender people, which she would assist in getting access to gender-affirming care, and ended up getting involved into deep relationships with a few of them, namely Tony Abel and Dora Hishta, truly a T4T pioneer. After the art school dropouts administration began, she fled to New York City, where she wrote in the 1950s that transgender people were nothing new. In the meanwhile, in Berlin, queer art was being called degenerate, and the Eldorado was closed down and turned by the Nazis into the headquarters for their paramilitary wing. Cool film, go check it out if you have the chance, but now, what do you think the comment section of the trailer looks like here on YouTube? Maybe it's something along the lines of, it's horrible what fascism took away from these people and how long it took for queer folk to earn back a sliver of freedom to love and live that they once had. Who am I kidding, liebe Fremde Online? It's a YouTube comment section, you know they say, oh, so that's why Hitler did what he did. Maybe he had a point after all. Not exaggerating, let me read some. Why is Netflix making me agree with the Nazis? I really wonder if the Nazis were the bad guys and their spirit died and led to distress. It took one loud dissenting voice to destroy the rot. It's so heartbreaking how history likes to rhyme. The next place I went looking for ghosts of queer's past, of Berliner's past, was the Babylon, one of the most fantastic cinemas I've ever been to in my life. It opened in 1929 during the Weimar era, and it's one of the oldest still operating cinemas in the city. Right across the monumental theater Volksbühne, the Babylon served as a hiding place for Jewish people under persecution during the art school dropout administration, and it's still to this day one of the most iconic surviving ghosts from that era, playing impressionist German films such as Metropolis in its entirety with a full live orchestra. Super cool stuff. It was a summer night last year when I stepped into the Babylon Bohème, an event where the cinema dresses up as it was 100 years ago. A literal cabaret party inside a centenary cinema with silent films playing in the projection room while an old lady played the organ, while the foyer had burlesque performances, absinthe, puppet theater, and vintage casino, very Jay Gatsby but much more gay, while Let's Misbehave echoed the cinema walls with another live band performance, at the end of the night. I'm telling you, Berlin is super cool, and I was just glad that my elbow gloves proved to be a good investment. But cinema sometimes isn't only about having drinks and dancing and misbehaving, it's about seeing films. And while the walls of the Babylon tell many stories, in this video, we will discuss a more decadent one. Because on a summer night last year, I sat in a centenary cinema to watch Sally Bowles and the MC tell their queer stories of Berlin. So, enough with mine. Let's jump to theirs. "1929, the Babylon Cinema just opened in Berlin, and 2 streets away from the Eldorado Cabaret, a 25-year-old twink named Christopher Isherwood just moves in. He was a camera or something, a sensitive English boy who was weirdly close to his literature high school teacher, in a time where homosexuality was illegal in the ever-progressive Turf Island. I guess some things never change, right? Isherwood found freedom, community, and acceptance in Berlin. As the MC would put it, gay escapade? To Christopher, Berlin meant boys. Having a literal bred summer in the Berliner Nights, he ended up meeting Magnus Hirschfeld himself, head researcher of the Institute for Sexual Sciences. This was, of course, a pioneering Berliner non-profit championing LGBT rights and pushing for transgender research already in the 1920s. With their headquarters in Berlin's Tiergarten, they were the ones handing out the trans licenses I talked about earlier, and Charlotte Charlach worked as their receptionist. Also, of course, they were first target of the Nazi book burnings, which destroyed most of its archive and has since been called by J.K. Rowling a fever dream, but no matter what any Holocaust revisionist might say, that did happen. Meeting Hirschfeld was described as the moment when Christopher was brought face to face with his tribe. His tribe being, obviously, people with pronouns who would have been obsessed with Liza Minelli had they had the opportunity. He moved into a vg or a shared flat, this one, by the way, and he wrote a novel called Goodbye to Berlin, while looking out of the windows of his apartment into the streets of Schöneberg. I am a camera, with its shutter open, quite passive, recording, not thinking. In a series of memoirs, he wrote stories that were, again, suspiciously familiar to me, of how nobody spoke any German, everybody was a little bit bi, and everybody was in a poly relationship. Everybody was broke, of course, but who wasn't those days? Everybody was dreaming of becoming, dreaming of creating, and some of them almost did. From friendly bartenders to the flapper Sally Bowles, of the constant fighting between his neighbors, a Jewish woman living in the apartment below, and a Bavarian Nazi living next door, always spying on the enemy through the cracks in the wooden floor. Back to the TARDIS, let's travel 40 years into the future. Bob Fosse, choreographer, dancer, stage director, filmmaker, and straight? Never mind, Bob Fosse is in desperate need of a job. Relatable. Musicals are dying, you see. Flop after flop after flop. If big movie musicals were the MCU, this would be Quantum Mania levels of trouble, but instead of Quantum Mania, it was a movie Bob directed called Sweet Charity, which almost sent Universal bankrupt. The last big musical blockbuster had been The Sound of Music, funnily enough, a movie about Nazis, and the taste of moviegoers had been changing since. It was the 70s, and the room for big soundstage, happy-go-lucky films seemed to be decreasing more and more. This is the decade that gave room to Kubrick, Coppola, and Scorsese, and US cinema was moving to a more gritty, grounded, and serious style of filmmaking. Bob needed a job, and when he heard they were looking for someone to direct an adaptation of an 8 Tony winner stage musical, the choreographer practically begged the studio to let him do it. And because he had, well, just directed Quantumania, the studio decided to hand him a very tight budget and stayed glued to his back, making it very clear that he could be replaced at any turn. All that pressure to make a perfect adaptation of a massively successful Broadway musical, a weird queer story about chasing our dreams during the end of the world, a musical inspired by the book Christopher Isherwood wrote while looking out his window in Schöneberg. A failed director with a tight budget directing a dark musical about bisexuals and Nazis. Who could save this doomed project? Well, the most incredible Nepo baby of all time, who was determined to prove she was much more than a Nepo baby, Judy Garland's daughter, a true friend of Dorothy, Liza with a Z, not Lisa with an S. And I saw her for the first time inside of an old German cinema last summer. But back to me very quickly. Sorry shit, Hanjanlin, you know how egocentric YouTubers can be. Can I go for more than 10 minutes without talking about myself? Only time will tell. But the thing is, I love musicals. I always have. As a kid, my parents would put the Cats VHS for me to sleep. That's what made me trans, Mom. It's your fault. But only in my 20s was when I really dove deep into my musical backlog, and I have always absolutely loved Chicago. How can I not? Foxy Roxy Hart, Billy Flynn, that movie was a perfectly stellar adaptation from stage to screen, and due to my own ignorance, I never really took the chance to sit myself down and watch Cabaret until, well, my 1920s Hyperfocus, and I think it's because Chicago was so good. I always had the impression Cabaret was just an older version of it, a musical about burlesque fun with less razzle-dazzle in its direction. Oh my god, how wrong I was. I was not ready for what was waiting for me when I stepped into that cinema, and I think Cabaret was the culmination of everything I had been feeling in Berlin since I moved. The ghosts were there, on the screen, in front of me, and they were incredible, and they were heartbreaking, and they were so real. Cabaret starts at the Berlin main station, I know, tragic, as Brian is arriving in the city. Brian here is a stand-in for the narrator, the storyteller, you know, Christopher Isherwood, the English twink. Brian knocks at the door of this spacious, gigantic Altbau apartment, and Sally Bowles opens it with her greenly decadent nail polish. I honestly don't know why green represents decadence, must be a 20s thing. As Sally welcomes him inside this world of nightlife, counterculture, people who are lost finding a living between booze and music, I was hypnotized by her manic pixie bisexual chaos as soon as she opened her mouth. But the funniest thing about this scene is that the movie portrays this gigantic apartment in the middle of Schöneberg as, supposedly, a dirty, small, decadent place where only society's rejects and outcasts would live. Let me tell you something, you put an apartment like this for rent in Berlin today, people will be killing each other to get the rental contract. The line will stretch 4 streets away from the door. But while Brian is invited in, and because his room is somehow too small, he must give English lessons in Sally's room to afford rent. The story follows with 2 separate plots. The main one focusing on Sally and Brian and their evolving relationship, from roomies to lovers to sugar babies in a throuple with Maximilian, a rich German businessman who then proceeds to ghost them. Are you sure this is not set in 2026? The side plot revolves around 2 of Brian's students, the bon vivant gigolo Fritz and the very virgin Jewish heiress Natalia Landauer, and their very straightly doomed crush for each other. At night, Sally works as a singer at the famous cabaret, the Kit Kat Club. Feverish, wild, and filled with the most diverse cast of characters, international queer performers, sex workers who represent the soul of this Berlin underground of the 1920s. A space these people couldn't find in any other city. In Berlin, cinema is also booming with German expressionism, and Sally has dreams of becoming a big star. The stage of the Kit Kat is where she can sing and be discovered, and while that doesn't happen, she keeps on jumping to whichever man she can benefit off, be them actually influential and important people, or just charlatans chatting her up. Side to side with Sally always stands the infamous MC, the queer-coded host who coordinates these performers, sells their art, bounces off of them, uplifts each one of them to the stage. The MC gives the rejects a voice. If the audience of the Kit Kat represents German society as a whole, the MC is the door to the margins of it. He is the bridge between Germany and divine decadence, and Germany demands of him entertainment in whichever terms, demands to forget their troubles outside. For Brian, stepping into the Kit Kat Club is like falling down a rabbit hole into a universe where all the rules of polite, homophobic British society have evaporated. His gay self can't help but start shyly flirting with wealthy businessmen in sharp suits, sharing the same space as the broke artists. Of course, what called my attention the most was Brian sharing the pissoir side to side with a trans woman. Truly the future British conservatives want. Brian, our sensitive English twink, has a look in his eye that reminds me of the opening of Christopher Isherwood's book. I am a camera with its shutter open, quite passive, recording, not thinking. But this camera is fascinated with the world of possibility that is parading through the night in front of his lens. just like me walking into the Hanate. The MC runs the night, played by the absolutely magnetic Joe Gray, sporting red cheeks and a smile that oozes both joy and uncanniness. Almost as a shapeshifter, mocking German traditions, turning hyperinflation into a dance routine, and singing silly little songs about polyamorous relationships. He's the bridge between the stage and the audience, but also conveys through songs the narrative thread that ties the story together. He gives people the permission to laugh, to sin, and to look the other way. He doesn't have a real name, he doesn't have a backstory, he's just this floating ghost of Weimar Berlin, welcoming you in. Brian and Sally's relationship is queer panic. They go from roommates to lovers in the messiest, gayest way possible. Sally hits on Brian very straightforwardly, only to realize he is gay. We've all been there, baby. But then, after meeting and connecting more deeply with Sally, Brian realizes he's actually more in the demi-romantic pan-curious with benefits side of the spectrum. We've all been there too, baby. Sally wants to make it big, make films, and sing her way to stardom, while Brian is going through the queer puberty that homophobic England denied him. It's messy, and it gets even more Berlin-coded when Maximilian appears, the wealthy German baron who has a house in the lake. He buys them gold cigarette cases and promises them the world. It's a bisexual dream turned nightmare. They get a small taste of the ultra-privileged elite lifestyle and are allowed to dream with a life that can exist outside of the claustrophobic walls of the Kit Kat Club. Our B-plot starts as a rom-com but ends up being the emotional anchor of this entire historical tragedy. Fritz is a broke gigolo who targets Natalia Landauer, a bougie Jewish heiress just for her money until he actually falls in love with her. Natalia is perceptive enough to realize this womanizer might be more interested in her money than her, but she is a little bit unperceptive to the rising tide of anti-Semitism around her. Fritz, in the meanwhile, is carrying a massive secret. He is also Jewish, trying to, well, stay inside the closet to survive in a society that is rapidly turning into literally Nazi Germany. They get married in a beautiful romantic wedding, but a Jewish wedding. And you know what year it is. These stories develop to the backdrop of 1920s Germany, and as the film goes on, the intensity of the presence of the Nazi party is made stronger, intercut by some songs inside the cabaret, which are used as tools to set the mood for what happened outside. I have seen people write to ladies as just a quirky naughty nod to a ménage à trois, but I think it's more about an insight into how normalized, non-traditional, non-monogamic, non-straight relationships were in Weimar Berlin. Money can be a funny look at how Sally is just desperate for a sugar daddy, but also offers a look into the economic collapse post-1929 that ravaged through Germany. If You Could See Her is definitely the most controversial song of the musical, a way to signal to the audience that anti-Semitism was getting so widespreadly accepted that falling in love with a Jewish woman was seen as absurdly as falling in love with a gorilla. There are many not-so-hidden clues that National Socialism is gaining space. From multiple political posters tucked away in the background, to many radio transmissions spread in between scenes, a multitude of anti-communist murals, until bodies start piling up. And even though it's impossible to ignore, Sally somehow still seems unbothered. Brian vehemently asks Maximilian how they can let this happen, just to hear back from this member of the German elite, "We can control them. They are actually useful because they get rid of the communists." Filmmaking-wise, this is a lot to balance in a low-budget movie musical, and this is where Bob Fosse absolutely shines. Just like many places I hang out in Berlin today, the Kit Kat Club is a basement. A dark, sweaty, claustrophobic little cave with many fewer fire exits than I would like. Contrasting this dark and closed environment where queer lives are allowed to thrive with places like Maximilian's mansion gives us a distinct visual separation of what place is reserved for different people in German society. Heartbreakingly enough, the only song that takes place outside is the Nazi anthem sung by a pretty young Hitlerist youth Aryan boy, "Tomorrow Belongs to Me." Before you can realize, everyone around is joining him in a hymn about a bright future. A future that belongs to them only, instead of the old Jewish men or the weirdos at the Kit Kat Club. It is staged in the bright, beautiful, wholesome daylight of a bucolic German Biergarten. The queers, the people at the margin, can only sing their joys confined to the dark, but the right wing, they're out freely under the sun. The change in public opinion is reinforced by editing choices like the sequence where the MC is hosting a yodeling performance, and Fosse splices it directly with the club manager getting beaten to a bloody pulp in a dark alleyway. Maybe Berlin isn't as safe anymore. Seeing the situation getting dreary, and after promptly getting his ass kicked by a couple of Nazis, Brian decides to flee from Berlin, ready to start a family with Sally. Sally finds out that she's pregnant, which would also be perfect timing to say goodbye to the wild nights at the Kit Kat Club. But she chooses to stay. Her dream of becoming a singer or movie star is too strong. Her memories of a city she loves are too sweet. Abortion was an expensive option, but still an option in Weimar Berlin. And even if she makes a fatal mistake, she would rather be sure that she lived to the fullest, because life is a cabaret. When Sally sings the title song of the film, she recalls her friend Elsie, who died too young due to abuse of pills and liquor. Elsie partied too much and was the happiest corpse she'd ever seen. And that's the way she chooses to go. Sally chooses to enjoy the night while it lasts, even if for a brief moment of joy. And brief indeed it was. The main message of the film is often read as a cautionary tale. Look at Sally, how irresponsible. She was too busy partying, got distracted, and now the Nazis are in power. Beware, if you party too much, that can also happen in a country. And I get that can be a message that can be kind of important, mostly for some queer folk who like to forget that the liberties they enjoy are intrinsically linked to the political struggle and resistance of many people who came before. But still, that's a really common take I see everywhere, but I can't help but feel like it's a little bit shallow and even cynical in a lot of ways. And I think there is so much more nuance here to be explored. I haven't had the chance to see the stage musical live, but I might have checked a slime tutorial or two. You can't prove anything. I would just say I had absolutely no idea how sexy Fluber from Spy Kids was. But I also read some essays and text about the differences between the multiple stagings of cabaret. How in one, the MC can be portrayed as another queer victim of Nazi Germany, and in others, he is almost a perpetrator, almost like an entity that embodies the spirit of all Germans to represent what they were feeling at that point in time. But for the sake of this video, I will be focusing on the movie, because there are a few choices and a few omissions that the film makes from the stage that I feel moved me really deeply. In the film, the MC feels a lot more like a real person than he does on stage. A guy with a job, always at the mercy of the audience's expectations. He's a reflection of them, yes, but he's also just the guy working, an extremely queer performer, Sally's friend most of all, and I believe these small interactions between them do not really exist that often in the stage. Rather than that, in the film, MC solos are turned into duets with his bisexual friend. In the stage, the MC is almost amorphous, like a ghost if you may, absorbing values, being a representation of a society, but here, he feels more flesh and bone. By cutting the song I Don't Care Much, the main example of German apathy, the MC becomes someone who instead mocks Hitler on stage. He drags German traditions through the mud. He gives room on stage to trans people. He does his best to keep entertaining an audience who keeps growing more reactionary by the day, because he has an entire cast of poor queer artists in the back who still need a job through the German financial crisis. And that includes Sally Bowes. In the stage play, the title song Cabaret is often played filled with grief and sorrow, as if Sally immediately regretted her decision of Berlin over a family with Brian, and is fully aware of the road she is destined to take. Sally is a hollow shell by the end of the play, because she never really had a chance at fulfilling her dream. In Isherwood's book, Sally is described as a bad singer, and her vocal prowess is never the main staple when she's casted in the play. Many people argue she is supposed to not be that good, otherwise she wouldn't be working in the Kit Kat Club, but you can't play that card when you rewrite that character for Liza Minelli. This single casting choice turns the film into a completely different story. On stage, this is an untalented flapper dreaming of stardom, but here, it's about a girl with all the talent in the world, but it doesn't matter. because fascism is outside. She can definitely make it, even if she has to go like Elsie. The song then becomes joyful, it's Dionysiac. It's a really brave and unapologetic choice to live her best life, face to fascism, almost standing up to it, almost as if she's singing a song to pick up a fight. Of course she won't make it, she just doesn't know it yet. So she stays, decidedly, and sings with all of her heart, with hope and joy. Life is a cabaret. After Sally makes her defiant choice in face of doom, the MC comes back. Auf Wiedersehen, a bientôt, and disappears behind the curtain. And then the music stops dead. Absolute silence. Fosse slowly pans the camera across this distorted foil mirror hanging above the stage. All movie long, this mirror has reflected the audience. The misfits, the queers, trans people, sex workers, people trying to look for a little bit of connection through an economical crash, but as the camera pans now, the reflection shows swastikas. The audience has changed. Weimar, Magnus Hirschfeld, Charlotte Charlock, the Eldorado, the transvestite permits, the lesbian magazines, all of that is gone. The film ends right there. Christopher Isherwood saw all of that. As he said, he saw it as a camera, quite passive, recording, not thinking. And if we look at that mirror today, in 2026, what exactly is reflecting back at us?
Until what happened at the beginning was you saw this cabaret life as something kind of seductive and interesting and fun. And you realize at the end that all of that tawdriness and all of that overt sexuality and all of that excessive behavior ultimately was a sign of the disintegration of the society. And what you thought was fun at first was horrible at the end. But that was sort of a metaphor for Adolf Hitler too. He presented himself as, there'll be food on every table and, come with me. And I always thought of my character as a very similar character in terms of what I offer the audience. Come with me. In Here, life is beautiful. The orchestra is beautiful. And at the end, see, didn't I tell you? It's all beautiful. And of course the world was collapsing, but he has a kind of, I told you, so kind of dark, and I always thought he was a bad guy, but there were people who come to see that show who keep thinking, oh, he's fun. People read into it what they like.
Well, I'll tell you what I read into it, Joe Gray. Cabaret is 100% written, directed, and acted as a cautionary tale. There is no denying that. But in the MC and in Sally, I can see a glimpse of that Berlin that Christopher fell in love with when he first arrived here, because it's the same that I see, and I really want to bring that little bit of nuance to the conversation. In some of the cabaret analysis I have seen, I found that under some very straight and cis eyes, a quite judgmental outlook at cabaret can be found. Reviews that will talk about the sex and depravity and divine decadence and wow, how sexy is Liza Minelli, she's a superstar, and kind of imply that it was this lifestyle, specifically, what caused the uprise of fascism. It's not that different from a YouTube comment who will look at the queerness and freedom of places like the Eldorado and think, well, maybe Hitler wasn't wrong after all. It's these unattentive eyes who will sit in the audience of the Kit Kat Club and judge the performers on stage, blaming them for the end of the world outside. But I think that any queer person watching cabaret would never think that the Kit Kat is a cause for fascism or a symptom of a decadent society. They see a sanctuary, a beautiful place that still tries to stand during the end of the world. And what do we do instead? Do we run away? Stay all alone in our rooms? In many ways, Elsie is kind of right. The goal of fascism is to stop us from going out to hear the music play, strip us of our individuality, our right to joy of living our lives together with whomever we want to and without fear. The existential emptiness at the end of the stage version of Cabaret and Bob Fosse's version is replaced with a rebel yell of queer joy. Because everyone fights back in their own way, and Brian's strategy to punch his way through SS officers did not work out that well either. Because can we judge someone like Sally, rejected by her family and society, from clinging to a place where she felt like she belonged? Can we judge queer people for trying to stay in the only place on the planet where they ever felt at home? And it's not mindless parties either. I have never been to a single apolitical party in Berlin in the 2 years that I've been here, because standing up and singing is a political act. Parties are places to denounce bigotry, to empower trans bodies, to read out political manifestos in form of poetry, to put Palestinian people on a stage and give them a microphone for the first time in a long time, to not let work or routine distract us from the troubles that are outside. Use the cabaret to make one of the boldest claims of all, that even in front of fascism, our bodies have always existed and will keep existing forever, no matter how hard they try and sometimes succeed in exterminating us. This will forever be a place for people like us. And that is also true for the real people of 1920s Berlin who went to these cabarets. John Ross, the real-life woman who inspired Sally Bowles, was really angry at the whole depiction of her in Christopher's book. She would never stay silent in front of a murder from the Nazi party. She was a super woke, lifelong Marxist and left the Berlin cabarets to go directly to the front line in the Spanish Civil War as a war correspondent, fighting fascists. Christopher Isherwood himself aided refugees fleeing World War II, was incredibly important for the gay liberation movement, and his writings are the reason why we can still be talking about those queer ghosts today on the internet. The most important message of Cabaret isn't fascism rises because the gays are busy partying. Fascism rises because the German elites, like Maximilian, think the Nazis are useful to keep the communists at bay and protect their only interests. Not the arts, not Sally Bowles, but their own capital. And when things start to look bad, Maximilian ghosts the queer people he had his fun with to ditch off to Argentina. Kind of bad vibes to stay in Germany when there's a world war about to go down. The people in the cabaret were the Third Reich's very first targets, quite literally, when you look at Magnus Hirschfeld. The people who stood up to them were the first ones to be done with. Cabaret, yes, is the story of the dangers of indifference in front of fascism, but at the bottom of this, there is also a beautiful and very personal story of a twink and many other queer people who came to Berlin running away from intolerance, violence, and queer phobia, looking for safe haven and just hoping that maybe this time, for the first time, they'd win, but they didn't. And the most heartbreaking part of Cabaret comes from us knowing that they don't. Being set in Berlin gives Cabaret a very specific atmosphere and gravitas, but honestly, this story could have happened anywhere. We are seeing genocides being committed in the world right now. There isn't a specific moral fault that is inherent within the mind of the German that makes them more likely to vote for a fascist. Give the right scenario, economical crisis, cultural conservatism, fear of the future and a common enemy, and fascism can rise in Brazil, in Japan, in the United States. The story of Cabaret is the story of Berlin, but the cautionary tale is for everyone. But, heartbreakingly enough, it's also for Berlin. As I told you before, the nightlife is under threat, but that is more symbolic than anything, because there is so much more at risk than the cabarets and techno clubs. And because it took 8 months for me to finish writing the script, the Renate managed, with a bit of public shaming, to defeat their landlords and stay open, so we get a little bit of a happy ending to that side of the story. But as I told you in the beginning, this is a video about ghosts, because I saw them again. I was marching last week, you see, marching for dikes, for queer immigrants, for the memory of Charlotte Sherlock. And I was at the Tiergarten, a few meters away from where Magnus Hirschfeld opened a pioneering clinic for gender-affirming care 100 years ago. Nearby, a few right-wing groups protested against our right to march. I was at the Tiergarten and I was tired from walking all day. I got a ride home at 9:58 p.m. At 10 p.m., a 21-year-old man with ties to the Islamic State drove a white van into the Tiergarten, wounding dozens and killing a woman. He found a barrier-free entry to the park somehow, a spot where public authorities had maybe overlooked or the police forgot to put a roadblock. Maybe they were too busy earlier that day, beating up queer people at Pride who had been more vocal against the positions of the German government. So, an extremist, known to the police, found an opening and drove a white van into the Tiergarten. In Berlin, Christopher Isherwood found a safe haven for identity, community, and queer joy. The right-wing groups wanted to change that, as did the driver in the white van. I got many texts from friends asking me if I was okay, and I sent many back. Everyone was fine, but it was a matter of a coin toss. Terror is a cruelly random concept to me because all it takes for you is the wrong place and the wrong time. It's not the point that it could have been me or any of my friends, the point is that it was in many ways. It was the couple who complimented my outfit earlier in the day, the boy who came from a small town for his first Pride and asked me where to find a beer, the girl who lent me a lighter or the one who accidentally stepped on my foot, the sweet envy I flirted with, that couple celebrating their engagement, a queer person who migrated from our religiously fundamentalist country to run away from homophobic violence there, a straight ally who was just passing by. But the people at Tiergarten that evening were there for the same reasons as me. And because of that, I was a target in the same way that they were. For the same reason that the Eldorado was 100 years ago. The far right, who hours before was questioning our right to march, immediately stood up to claim that only they could protect the queer community. And suddenly, what was threatening us is immigration or the Muslim community. In 1930, it might as well have been the Jew. Berlin, a city built on queer immigration, a community which was attacked by a man who was born in Berlin, a man who managed to pull out an attack even while being under direct police surveillance. The right wing always tells us to fear the stranger, the different, but that was never a threat to our diverse communities. The threat to us has always just been homophobia. It's hate. Hate that comes, yes, also from fundamentalist Islam, but just as much from the far right, always pushing the Overton window, using legislation as an even more deadly and widespread weapon than any other, all over the world. It happened to Juniper Blessing, and it happened to Dandara dos Santos, and it happened to all the queer people who went to the Eldorado and ended up wearing pink triangles in their arms. Because when it doesn't satisfy their narrative, they just don't care very much. When Allied forces liberated the Nazi concentration camps in 1945, many queer people were kept imprisoned. The threat is not an evil, unknown, foreign enemy. The threat is always just queer phobia. And now, the AfD, whose politicians equate transness to a cult, who say only they can protect the queer people they want to legislate out of public life, they are leading the polls. It's so heartbreaking how history likes to rhyme. They have in their manifesto the goal to legislate queer people out of the definition of family, pushing to dismantle the European Union and openly discussing a remigration policy. Funny word, right? I also never heard it before, but it's a plan to expel millions of people from Germany. Immigrants, asylum seekers, and even citizens who don't fit their own definition of who gets to be German enough. As an immigrant and, well, me, my track record is not helping me a lot here. Which begs the question, am I Sally Bowles? Am I trying to sing a song while the world ends? When is the right time to flee Nazi Germany? And what can we even do? Do we stay and fight? Because even if we vote and protest and strike, Berlin is still just a city, a progressive island, surrounded by a lot of unsatisfied people who have never even talked to an immigrant before. Do I cry for help? Do I run under the U-Bahn bridge to scream my lungs out? Do I write a 17-page YouTube essay begging dear strangers online to stop for a minute and try not to add even more ghosts to this beautiful city that is already so overwhelmingly haunted? Because I can't afford to let these ghosts be my roommates, and there's no escaping, and it's everywhere. In Germany, in Brazil, in the United States. To fight for queer people living their joy in Kreuzberg is to fight for queer people living their joy in Seattle and in São Paulo and in Tehran, and it is to honor the joy of queer people in the Eldorado 100 years ago. Because what history teaches us is that nowhere is safe enough and we can lose it all in the blink of an eye, but we have a weapon. We know of what happened before. We know Sally's fate, but she doesn't. We can stay and sing and fight. Fight for each and every Sally Bowles in the crazy third act of cabaret that the world is eerily looking like right now. But this is not cabaret, and I am not a camera. Oh, I'm far from it.